begin with a gripping hook. The call that ruined my life came on a Tuesday. Arthur is Henderson. We're letting you go. I remember the silence in my tiny office, the smell of stale coffee and drying ink. We have the lab results, he continued, his voice slick with corporate pity. The report you filed on the Blackwood Manor, it was falsified. There was no mold. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's not possible. The stains… What? They were spreading. He sighed, a sound of pure dismissal. The board considers it gross misconduct. Trying to tank a historic property sale with ghost stories? You're lucky we're not suing. He hung up. And just like that, 15 years as a senior building inspector evaporated. I wasn't fired for a mistake. I was fired for telling the truth about something they refused to see. The stains in that foundation weren't mold. They were dark, reddish-black, and when I'd touched one, it had felt warm. It pulsed, faintly, like a dying heartbeat in the stone. I was ruined because I had warned them that the house was bleeding. The exile into the unknown and obsessive descent. My family's reaction was a special kind of hell. My father, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and stock prices, looked at me with a disgust I'd never seen before. You had a pension, a respectable career. He'd seethed over a tense family dinner. And you threw it all away to go chasing shadows. You've disgraced us, Arthur. My mother just cried, begging me to see a professional and come back to reality. My sister Sarah was the worst. They're laughing at us at the country club, Art, she hissed over the phone. The crazy inspector and his haunted house. Their ridicule was the fuel. It drove me from my life, from everything I knew, into a cramped apartment that smelled of old paper and dust. I lost my career, but I found a purpose. The world was full of bleeding houses and no one was listening. I became an occult structural surveyor. I spent my savings on forbidden books, ancient architectural treatises, and grim texts that spoke of things I knew instinctively were real. I learned that certain buildings aren't just shelters, they're vessels. That foundations can be consecrated with more than just concrete. Sometimes they're bound with blood, pain, and sacrifice. Ritual architectural forensics, I called it, a field of one. I started a small blog, posting my research. The ridicule followed me there. Get a real job, you lunatic, the comments read. My dude, it's called mildew. But a few people, desperate people who heard whispers from their walls and saw faces in their floorboards, they reached out. They were my first clients. They were the ones who taught me how deep the rot really went. The horrific trials and dark triumph. My first real case was a farmhouse in upstate New York. A family was being torn apart by what they called a sickness in their home. The children had night terrors. The parents were constantly ill, and a palpable despair had settled over the property like a shroud. The previous inspectors found nothing. I arrived, and I didn't look for faulty wiring. I looked for unnatural symmetries. I measured the resonance of the stones in the hearth. I analyzed the geometry of the roof beams. I found it in the cellar. A support beam carved from an ancient oak that didn't match any of the others. It was the building's skeletal anchor, and it was deeply, horribly wrong. Etched into the wood, almost invisible, were sigils I recognized from a 17th century text on sacrificial bindings. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. The house itself was a parasitic entity designed to feed on the emotional energy of its inhabitants. It was starving them of their lives. To break the curse, I had to perform a counter-ritual, a kind of architectural exorcism. I had to find the structure's heart and sever its connection. It fought me. As I chiseled into the beam, the air grew thick and cold enough to see my breath. The house groaned around me, a sound of splintering wood and grinding stone that came from everywhere at once. A psychic pressure slammed into me, showing me visions of my father's sneering face, my mother's tears, my own deepest fears of failure and madness. It used my own pain against me. For a moment, I almost believed it, almost gave in. But the memory of Henderson's voice, of my family's scorn, it wasn't a weakness anymore. It was rage. It was iron in my soul. I screamed and drove the cold iron chisel into the heart of the beam. The house shrieked, a sound that was not wind or wood, but pure agony. Then silence. The air cleared. The oppressive weight vanished. I was left shaking, covered in sweat, with a new jagged scar on my palm where the chisel had slipped. But I had won. I had learned the language of these places, and I knew how to make them scream back. My name began to circulate in the shadows, a whisper among those who had nowhere else to turn. I was the one you called when the horror wasn't in your house. The horror was your house. The return and unearthed truth. Years later, the call I never expected came. It was Sarah. Her voice was thin, stripped of all its old condescension, and trembling with a fear she couldn't hide. "Arthur, you have to come home," she begged. "It's the house. He's not right. And there are these stains in the basement. They're getting bigger." I returned not as the disgraced son, but as something else entirely. I carried a worn leather case filled with tools that would have given my father an aneurysm years ago. Tuning forks made of silver, a level filled with holy water, a small polished obsidian mirror. They watched me, my family, as I walked through the home I grew up in. They were ghosts in their own living room, pale and silent. The air was thick with the same stagnant dread I'd felt in that New York farmhouse. I went straight to the basement. There it was, a dark, visceral stain, weeping from the concrete foundation, the same kind that started it all. I didn't need to test it. I could feel the faint, sickly warmth radiating from it. I could feel its ancient, patient hunger. I gathered them in the living room, under the family photos that mocked us with their smiling faces. My father, gaunt and hollow-eyed, wouldn't look at me. My mother clutched a rosary. "This house was built on compromised ground," I said, my voice quiet, but it filled the suffocating silence. But that wasn't enough to wake it. An entity like this, it needs to be fed. It needs a steady diet of misery, of concentrated bitterness to gain a foothold. I looked from my father's stony face to my mother's trembling lips to my sister's wide, terrified eyes. "For years," I continued, "this house has been soaking in it. The shame, the resentment, the disappointment. All of it directed at me. You thought your ridicule was a weapon to hurt me." I took a step forward, and my shadow fell over them. "You were wrong. It was an offering. You weren't punishing me. You were feeding it." I knelt and pressed my scarred palm flat against the living room floorboards. "Your disbelief didn't protect you. It made you the perfect anchor." As I began to whisper the words of a severing right, they finally saw it. The shadows in the corners of the room didn't just darken, they writhed. A low moan vibrated up through the floor, the sound of a sleeper stirring in a shallow grave. The temperature plummeted. My mother gasped, her knuckles white on her rosary. My father let out a choked cry as he saw the oppressive weight of his own judgment manifest as a physical presence in the room. This was the shadow he told me to stop chasing, and it was here, in his home, invited in by his own scorn. I didn't destroy it. Some things you can't destroy. You can only contain them. I bound it, silenced it, and locked it back into the foundation it called home. When it was over, the house was just a house again, silent, empty. I stood up, the quiet master of a darkness they had nurtured. I looked at my family, shattered and ashamed, and for the first time they saw me, not the failure, not the madman, but the one who had walked through the fire they had only ever mocked from a safe distance.